Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to the End Poem Podcast, a new one-on-one show where I sit down with the folks behind some of our favorite games, or maybe the games that are just around the corner. I'm Alex James Kane, author of the Boss Fight Books entry on Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I've written for places like Polygon, who published my oral history of Morrowind in 2019, for Killscreen, Rolling Stone, and Glixel, Variety, StarWars.com, USA Today, PC Gamer, and Fangoria Magazine. I thought this podcast might be a perfect way to catch up with some of the people I've talked to in years past, meet some very cool new ones, and learn more about the art and craft of making video games. My guest today is New York Times bestselling author and video game writer Sam Maggs. She was a pop culture journalist for a while, blogging at places like The Mary Sue, IO9, and Tor.com, but went on to do a lot of big franchise comics and fiction like Captain Marvel, The Wasp, Star Wars Adventures for IDW. Sam has also worked for BioWare, Insomniac Games, Wizards of the Coast, Critical Role, and Activision on games like Anthem, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Call of Duty Vanguard. Her recent novel, Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars, explores the period between Respawn's Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. If you're a fan of Night Sister Marin and Cal Kestis, it's a must-read. And this was a really fun chat. Here's me and Sam Maggs. First of all, congrats on the book. It's exciting that you were kind of able to write a novel from Marin's point of view and have it be a New York Times bestseller. So that's got to be good for your first Star Wars novel, right?
Oh, I mean, huge. And it also feels exciting for a video game novel. I think that it just shows how much people want more content of these characters that they love as much as I do.
Yeah, I was really impressed how it lines up thematically and in terms of the characters' journeys, like from the first game and on through. I read the book after playing both games, so kind of out of order, but it does feel like, sort of a must read for somebody who loves Survivor. So, it's like the best compliment you can give something like this, right? That it feels essential for people who like these characters, and you kind of see how Cal gets to be an adult and things like that, as opposed to sort of the child Cameron that we get in the first game. You must have, everybody must have been on the same page in terms of like the writing team and stuff like that. So who was sort of your point of contact for like the narrative side of things?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. And I worked in concert with both the folks at Respawn and the folks at Lucasfilm to make sure that we were all aligned. At the point when I started writing the book, the game story already existed and was completed. So they already knew what they were going to do for Survivor. So with the folks at LFL Games and the narrative team at Respawn, we were able to all sit down together. Respawn put together essentially a one sheet that was kind of like, here are the must-haves that we really want to see in the book. And that included things like, spoiler alert here, if you haven't played the game, but that included things like, how did Greaves lose his arm? Starting to see the crew fight, establishing Marin's pansexuality canonically, this sort of list of like the things that they really wanted to see. And then they sat me down and took me through like a PowerPoint presentation, a deck basically of what the Jedi Survivor story was going to be front to back. So what I had when I was starting to write the book was I knew what happened in Fallen Order. I knew what was going to happen in Survivor. And I had a list of a few things that I knew I had to touch on, and I was able to build out from there. So my point of contact largely was my editor at formerly Del Rey, now Random House Worlds, Tom Holler, who is wonderful. And through Tom, we were able to work with, like I say, Story Group and the Respawn narrative team to make sure that everything was lining up the way that it needed to, so that everything made sense.
Awesome. Yeah, so have you had a chance to kind of just play the game for fun yet since the second's come out, or?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I haven't finished it yet because I am just like dicking around collecting seeds and stuff. um, there's so much game to explore. And the first game was similar, but like the second game, it's huge. And so I really wanted to take my time and just enjoy wandering around with my little buddy. So I'm about halfway through the story at the moment.
Yeah. Plus, you already kind of knew the story spoilers going in, so you didn't have to worry about
Oh
that
yeah, I
as
mean, I
much.
know what's going to happen. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I really loved the descriptions of Marin's, her green Night Sister fire, whatever you want to call it. She just calls it the fire, I guess, which is sort of her connection to the dark side or the shadow or the force. And did you mainly watch the Clone Wars to get into that? Or did you have like sort of new instructions coming in on how to sort of illustrate her powers?
Yeah, so my main existing knowledge of Night Sisters came from Clone Wars, but something that was kind of presented to me as an opportunity with this book was we don't know a lot about this. We haven't really had the opportunity to dive into this on a personal level. Like, what does it feel like when someone uses these powers? What is the extent of their abilities? How would it feel if you weren't on Dathomir anymore? And so Lucasfilm kind of gave me freedom to explore that a little bit, which was really cool. I think the two areas where Lucasfilm asked me specifically to kind of push the lore forwards a little bit and be creative and invent some more, kind of crunchy bits about Star Wars lore was both in Night Sister magic and then also the Fifth Brother's backstory, which we didn't have any of before Battle Scars. We basically just knew that he was an Inquisitor and he was pretty angry. We didn't know his species. We didn't know anything about him. And so I knew that I wanted to use an Inquisitor as the villain in this book. Originally, Tom and I thought it would be really fun to use the Inquisitor that Delilah Dawson is writing about in her upcoming Inquisitor novel, because we thought it'd be cool to connect those. But we were writing our books at the same time. So there wasn't enough like confirmed knowledge about Delilah's character for me to be able to pull that over. So Lucasfilm actually were the ones who suggested the Fifth Brother, and they were like, we don't know anything about him, and we would love for you to tell us about him. And so that was kind of the same story when it came to Night Sister Magic. Was this is the first time we've really been able to get into their heads, tell us what you think that feels like. And there was back and forth about that. One of the biggest things that I found surprising was in my early drafts of the book, almost until the very end, actually, I had Marin teleporting. One of her main powers was teleporting because when you play the game, it looks like she teleports. Like that's how she kind of it looks like she keeps up with Cal, but it's not. Lucasfilm was like, absolutely not. Night Sisters cannot do that. They just disappear and then move really fast. And I was like, okay, sure. Oh, cool, dude. Like, no problem. So that was one of the things that I had to change because I kind of made an assumption from the way that it looks in game, but that is different than how it actually like functions canonically. So, I had a lot of wiggle room, not total freedom, but yeah, they were cool about it.
That's funny. Yeah, I totally would have said that she teleports and that her
Me
magic is
too.
mysterious, and like that's good enough for me, but that's very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the synergy between the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show and this book and the game, the way that the Fifth Brother shows up again, and then the of course the hidden path is a big deal in the game at a certain point too. But so you sort of created Fret's species for the book, is that right? Or
It was a legacy species from, it had appeared in Legends. It is canonical currently, but we don't really, they've appeared in like, the Kashiri have appeared in like one comic book canonically, essentially, since wiping out um, the legacy Legends content. And I was like, I think it would be cool to use a species that does exist, but that we now get to kind of reinvent the backstory for a little bit. Some of the backstory that existed for the Kashirian Legends didn't really fit anymore. I tried to stay pretty close to that, but we got to tweak it a little bit so it fits better in the current canon. And that was cool. It felt like being able to go back and take something that already existed that was like a great species, something really interesting, and modernize it to fit the current Star Wars canon.
yeah, that's cool. That's a good example of how that sort of happens then, because it does happen occasionally where we sort of get something, and yeah, it usually is through the comics or the games and stuff. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Grease is a really lovable character, and I think that in this book especially you can't help but like feel for him, and then he's really good in Survivor. What did you think of this sort of idea implied in the book, and also maybe throughout Star Wars in general, this like idea of the wound as like a symbol of like familial love. You know, you get Luke losing his hand to his father, and Dagon Gera loses an arm.
Yeah.
There's like this running theme of the wound, and specifically, hands or arms. And with Grease,
Oh
it's
yeah.
really touching.
I mean, well, first of all, Grease is like one of my favorite characters. He was so easy to write in this book. His voice is so distinct and comes so easily when writing. I love his like grumpy exterior but heart of gold interior. He's so funny. But I this metaphor is so interesting, or this like theme of losing your arm through love for your family, and is something that like I thought about Luke losing his hand when I was writing Battle Scars and how it related to this, but I didn't really think about it in the context in which you're discussing it. And I think that's such a brilliant analysis of that sort of repetitive trope in Star Wars. Yeah, I think it's I mean, I don't know what to say about it except for I think you're 100% right. It's a great analysis of that. Like it's wonderful.
It's just funny that, yeah, I mean, it comes up, and with Grease, I feel like you sort of get into the meat of that more than like, typically it's not something we dwell on. Like Anakin gets his arm chopped off by Christopher Lee, and then it's kind of like, okay, next scene. But with Grease, you
Yeah,
really
they're all
feel his
good.
pain. Yeah.
Yeah, and with Grease, like I knew that he was going to be out of the game and running a bar by the time we got to Survivor, and that his sort of ongoing issue in Survivor was going to be like, I can't, because of my disability, I have to relearn how to do something that used to come really, really naturally to me. And now I have, my body has changed and I have to adjust the way that I do things, and it doesn't feel the same, and that feels really bad, and Grease doesn't know how to handle it. And so instead of handling it, he kind of just bails on it and is like, I don't, this is too difficult for me, it's too painful. um, and so getting back together with his family kind of forces him into a place where he has to relearn that in a different way. And he's not, obviously, we all change and our bodies change, and we're not the same people that we were before, and we adapt. And I think it's a really, the Respawn team came up with a really interesting way of, looking at a character that gains a disability and then has to kind of rethink the way that they see themselves and their career and the things that are important to them, and the toll that it can take on you mentally when you have to like relearn something that degrees feels as basic as and as easy and as natural as walking. So it felt really important to explore that in a way that, to your point, like previous Star Wars media hasn't really dove into that before. I think because it's really easy to say, and then they put a robot arm on and he's fine and nothing has changed. And so I like that we were able to actually like dig into that a little bit and be like, no, like this would impact you mentally. Even if his new arm does do everything his old arm does, there's still a mental component to that is messing with him,
Hmm.
understandably.
Yeah. You tap into something rich because, like, at the beginning of Survivor, the family is sort of split up, and then, there's that idea that he sort of comes back onto the ship, and the ship is like their home. And so when he's like sitting at the controls and sort of feeling like it's not quite the same home anymore, there's something like very, I don't know, something universal about that beat there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I appreciate that.
But, so you've got these sort of two components to your career, where you've worked on some video games, and then you've sort of worked in the sort of middle ground where you're bridging like the IP from novels to games. And so what are some of your memories of like discovering video games as a medium like that made you want to write for those?
Oh, well, I grew up playing games. It had always been a huge part of my life. My parents had my first system was an Intellivision on which I played a lot of Burger Time because I'm ancient.
I love Burger
um,
Time.
oh God, I love Burger Time. So good, so
So
difficult.
good. Yeah.
Now where's the Burger Time movie?
Yeah.
But I had always been a huge fan, and I had a PS2 and 64. But the first game that I remember getting really, really invested in when I was, 10, 11. I still have the pre-order sheet printed on paper in the box. But Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Amn was my first like video game obsession. I think in a lot of ways because it was the first game that I played where I could choose the gender of my player character. Like I could play as a girl. And I was like, oh, dang, there's rules. Like I get to be me in this game
Yeah.
instead of like, someone else or just playing generic dude or whatever. Like, played a lot of Link and Mario and stuff, but like it was really cool. And Baldur's Gate obviously is exceptionally story heavy. I mean, those games are like 90% text on screen. And that was the first time that I was just like, oh man, like the character, I mean, Minsk and Boo, and like these characters are eternal. And that was kind of my gateway, I think, into like, oh man, video game storytelling and video game characters can be this really like huge and impactful thing. And that stuck with me for a really long time. It's why I ended up at BioWare eventually. But I very much, that was sort of the first time that I realized and influenced the way that I think now about game storytelling, which is that like, I think it is the future of narrative. I think that other forms of story, and I write novels and comic books and I'm not trying to like be down on them or whatever, but like other forms of storytelling are passive. You intake them and they happen to you. You witness them. But video game storytelling is active. You are the character. You are experiencing the narrative because you are in control. I mean, that is even more the case in like choice-based RPGs. But in anything, like you are the protagonist. And so that form of, I think it's why I feel like game stories have impacted me the most and the strongest and the longest lasting, as opposed to like almost any other form of story that I've taken in. Like Mass Effect has impacted me and my life like so like intensely in a way that like not a lot of books or movies really have. And so I don't know. But yeah, that was my introduction to it.
Cool. Did you have like an Xbox and played Knights of the Old Republic back then, or was
Oh
it?
yeah, totally. Yep. And that was my gateway, and then
Yeah.
I got into the rest of it. But
Hmm.
and I love Knights of the Old Republic. I've joked about this on Twitter before, and a lot of angry people found it and misunderstood the joke. But I played a lot of the Lucasfilm game Yoda stories on my PC
Oh, right.
on my little laptop when I was a kid. And like, that game, I loved that game. I played it to death. I also played KOTOR, which I also loved, but like those old Lucasfilm games, projects were also so great. Like, for all that they were terrible, they were wonderful, you know?
Yeah, there's some real diamonds in the rough as far as like
Mm.
older Star Wars games. We didn't always have
Oh, yeah.
Jedi Survivors and Squadrons type games to, there was, there were the classics like KOTOR and Jedi Outcast and Racer, but there were also just these kind of experimental ones that were fun.
Totally. And like Knights of the Old Republic was so influential, like in so many ways. I mean, Juhani is like the first queer female character in Star Wars, really. It's huge. I owe a lot of being able to write battle scars to that character. So
Oh, I love
yeah.
that. Yeah, when I think about great BioWare companion characters, like Juhani is kind of the original, like amazing original BioWare
BioWare buddy.
companion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Oh my God,
Yeah.
100%. 100%. Yeah, no question.
So that's cool that you kind of thought about her for the whole, Marin and Fret relationship and stuff like that. That's cool that
Yeah, for
you can
sure.
you can kind of draw that line a little bit. So as far as like becoming a writer, did you ever do like writers workshops or things like that?
So I did my master's degree in like English literature.
Hmm.
And that was that was a real crash course in I went straight from high school to what we call university in Canada, straight into my master's, and I got my master's when I was 22. And from there, I sort of didn't know what to do with myself. Like, there's no clear path to becoming a video game writer or becoming a writer in general. And so my sort of crash course in writing professionally was writing online. I did a lot of digital journalism When I first started out, I wrote for a website called The Mary Sue for many years, as well as like a bunch of different Canadian newspapers. And those were sort of, that was sort of like my training ground. It helped me because I had to write like 5 articles a day because you have these insane quotas in digital journalism now, which is like a whole other issue. But it got me past my perfectionism. I think a lot of writers struggle with like drafting because they're like, oh my gosh, everything that I write has to be perfect. And, I just had to write. I had to write all day, every day, all the time. And like it had to be good enough, you
Yeah,
know? And so that was really helpful. But I never, I haven't, I've worked with a bunch of folks, especially at BioWare, who are big proponents of the Clarion sci-fi program, like the sci-fi writing program. And a lot of BioWare's um, writing practices come out of the techniques learned there.
interesting.
So yeah, that's a cool one.
Yeah,
But yeah, that was sort of my like early lesson in figuring out how to write.
very cool. Yeah, I went to the one in Seattle like a decade ago, and it was very friendly to that sort of, working writer that, the regular novelist or, the people writing. I met like Greg Bear, who was doing like the Halo novels at the time. And
Oh,
so
cool.
it was cool to kind of, see that side of publishing, as opposed to just the Georgia R. Martins of the world, that kind of thing. It's very, there's a certain kind of writer who can't afford to put out a book every 12 years, right? So,
Yeah, man, like 99% of us.
yeah,
Yeah.
so Clarion is cool for that kind of thing, like, that killing the perfectionism like you're talking about. So what's unique about your process that helps you do that? Are you very much a keyboard writer? Or are you pen and paper or?
Oh, yeah, I'm a keyboard guy. I mean, it depends on the medium that I'm writing in, because I write, I write novels and I write comic books and I write video games. Um, my process differs based on what I'm working on. It also differs based on whether or not I'm writing something original or something that is IP. So something that
Mhm.
someone else owns. I work largely in IP, have up until this point. And so, though there are slight differences, the process is mostly similar, especially early on, which is that there always has to be, I mean, typically I'm either approached to pitch. So they're kind of like, hey, we're looking for someone to write the Captain Marvel series. Like, what's your best idea? You know? Or in the case of Star Wars, they just approach me directly and are like, we want you to write this book. And I don't have to go through the song and dance of the pitch.
Yeah.
But so there's that early kind of, there can be this sort of early outline, which is the pitch. From there, especially always in IP writing, you have to move on to what basically amounts to like a short pitch, a synopsis. Like I would say, especially in comics, but even with this, like a paragraph about like, here's what I want the comic to look like, here's what I want the book to look like. This is sort of my like really top level idea. Sometimes I'll send 3 or 4 of those, especially in comics, to kind of be like, hey, pick the one you like. I'll do any of these. From there, it always moves on to the outline stage because when you're working with IP, before you dive into writing the actual script or the actual manuscript, everyone at every level of the approval process has to sign off on a really in-depth outline. And so, especially on Battle Scars, like we went back and forth on the outline for months and months and months, between, my editor, Lucasfilm, and Respawn, because everybody has to be bought in before you start making it. And that is the case with like all IP projects. So I'm not a seat of the pants writer. I write to an outline. I mean, obviously things often change as you get into it, and that's okay. But I because I have worked so heavily in IP, I am now always an outline writer. So even when I'm working, on my own stuff, I work from an outline now. And then I'll sort of break things down. If I'm working on a novel, I use a software program called Plotter, Plottr, which is the software equivalent of sticky tacking like cue card notes up on a wall to plot out, your main arc and your character arcs and like all of your beats and chapter breakdowns. It basically does that on your computer. You can do it on your computer instead of having to use a wall or a whiteboard or whatever to plot that out. And then once I have that all set up chapter by chapter, sort of beat by beat, I export that into a program called Scrivener, I think Scrivener, which is great manuscript writing software for novel writers. It lets you break your whole novel down section by section so that you're not just writing in one huge Microsoft Word document, which can be like horrifying. So those are the programs that I use for novel writing. So for something like Battle Scars, that's what it looks like. With comics, they're actually, weirdly enough, there is no approved or sort of general template for what a comic script looks like. Every writer does it differently. Like they're all mostly similar, but like it all looks different. There is no standardized model, which is like kind of bizarre, but I just write in Word. You break it down page by page, panel by panel, dialogue line by dialogue line, which is cool. And then games writing differs severely based on the project. Some projects will have proprietary software, BioWare in particular. When I was there, was using Frostbite and had a really complex dialogue editor built into the engine. Most places use Excel, which is like hateful, but like lots of games are written in Excel or Final Draft. So it really depends, but the process really for everything tends to be big outline that goes through a million levels of approvals before writing.
So what spoke to you about Fallen Order as like a Star Wars fan and somebody who loves games? Like when you played that first game, I think you tweeted that you were a big fan of Marin, but what
like
spoke to you?
immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I had the same reaction to that game. Was like, the section where she's introduced is so good, but like what sort of spoke to you about the story in the game?
I mean, my favorite sci-fi trope is ragtag space crew of idiots, found family, doofuses on a boat. Like like I say, Mass Effect, Firefly, like that is my favorite genre of story, really. Like it is my favorite thing. And so Fallen Order had that vibe more than almost anything else in Star Wars does, of like bunch of weirdos on a ship, don't know what they're doing, destined to fail, because they're so small. What could they possibly do against huge empire? And they all had such big immediate personalities. Like every character in Fallen Order, I was like, I immediately fell in love with and wanted to know more about them and spend more time with them. And so those two things combined, I was just like, oh man, I'm in love with this and I want more stories about these people. And especially, like you said, about Marin, because she gets introduced so late in a game that we don't get very much of her. So I immediately was like, oh my gosh, I want more of her. And I think that's why Battle Scars, I've seen some reviews kind of be like, oh, a lot of Star Wars novels are set on like a much larger scale, whereas Battle Scars is basically just like one mission over the span of 2 weeks, like a kind of just like a thing that happens to these guys during the intervening years, one of many like little adventures that happens to them. And that felt really important to me. I didn't want it to be a big epic. Like I wanted it to just be like, hey, and here's what a couple of weeks in the life of this crew looks like in the 5 years between 5-ish years between Fallen Order and Survivor, because they seem like a lot of other Star Wars stories really do have this grand scale, and I really like the micro scale of Fallen Order and of Survivor, which is not to say that they don't do important things that impact the galaxy. I mean, I guess it wasn't important enough for them to mention in Obi-Wan. Not that bothered me.
Yeah.
Or like Cal did this.
Yeah.
Acknowledge him.
Credit
well, I
where
wanted him to show up.
Oh yeah, I would love him to show up for an episode of anything.
God, I wish.
Yeah.
Give him a show.
So you worked at Insomniac for a little while, right?
Mm-hmm. I was there for a year and a half.
Do you have like a favorite memory of? Did you work on both Spider-Man and Ratchet and Clank, or?
I did. I wrote a bunch for the Spider-Man DLC, The City That Never Sleeps.
Oh, right.
And then I was lead writer on Rift Apart for about a year and a half. I was hired on specifically for Rift Apart because they were including a playable female character for the first time. And so they were looking for that voice. But when I joined, they were like, hey, we actually have to put out this Spider-Man DLC in the next like X number of weeks. can,
Hmm.
can you please write a bunch of it? And I was like, sure, man. So it was great. I loved working at Insomniac. The team there was so wonderful, so kind. I mean, the most exciting thing there for me, honestly, was like getting to write for Peter Parker. I mean, he's the most famous character like on Earth, literally. And it just felt so meaningful. And he's my dad's favorite comic book character, and it felt really special, and I felt really lucky, and it was really, really fun to work on. It also, I got lucky in that they had already been through all the hardships of the base game
Yeah.
and making that story and fleshing out like what their Peter sounds like and how they all the crunchy stuff of like how they get done. I got to just come in when all of that was already established, and they were kind of like, now write extra content. And I was like, great, sure. So I was very lucky in that regard, but it was really, really fun. And everyone on that team was incredibly talented. And working with Marcus Smith on Rift Apart, who was also the creative director of Sunset Overdrive,
Hmm.
he just has really wonderful vision, and it was really cool working with him and fighting really hard with him to maintain Rivet as a playable character in
Yeah.
that Ratchet game, which was not something that, folks were largely on board with. It was really hard to convince people that it was a good idea, and I cried a lot of tears over it. Like it was not an easy time, but I think time proved out that it was the right call. And so yeah, I feel really grateful that I got to be a part of that in the early days.
It wound up being, yeah, one of the best games on the PS5. So well done. Fight,
Yeah.
fight,
Oh,
fight
thank
one, you know?
you.
Yeah. And I mean, she does get kind of 50% of the screen time, it feels like, right? I hope.
Yeah, she does. And I left about, like I say, a year and a half into production on that game, and the rest of the story team took over. Like Lauren Me did a ton of the writing on that game. And she did an amazing job. And yeah, I think it turned out incredible.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Anthem, and I was really
Oh my
sad.
God. Thank you. You and nobody else. Thank you
Yeah,
so much, my friend.
there are dozens of us. There are dozens of us. No, but
I know, truly.
it was a real bummer what happened with that. Did you kind of have a certain reaction when you found out that they were just kind of not gonna pursue like DLC and just kind of sunset the game? Was that hard for you?
I mean, it was not surprising. Look, everything around Anthem was hard for me. BioWare was my dream studio. Obviously, like I said, I was a fan of them from the start. I got hired out there specifically to work on Anthem. Um, and it just like, I think the writing team, we really tried our best to infuse those characters with that like BioWare magic, and
Hmm.
that love. But ultimately, the narrative wasn't really the focus of that game. And I think, as a lot of people know, the development was sort of plagued by issues and indecision from leadership. And like the game had a lot of problems, and so it was my first game. It was a difficult first game to be a part of. I wish that things could have been different. I will say that a lot of the reasons that I think the game got sunsetted were things that everybody working on the game knew
Yeah.
about. Like we all knew and tried to sort of call out those problems and the things that we were nervous about during the development. And so when those kind of became the issues that came up on launch, you know, we were all there. We all knew, like, it wasn't surprising, I think we all wished that things could have gone differently for that game. I still do, because I'm still so proud of the work that everybody did on that game. I'm glad you like it, because I think that there's so much gold buried under like what is a layer of like really intense problems, unfortunately. But the character I wrote for that game, Bryn, like still one of my favorite characters that I've ever written. And I learned so much during my time at BioWare, and I met so many wonderful people. And I got taught how to write video games by like Patrick Weeks and like like the best video game writers in my opinion who have like ever existed. Like, so I mean, how lucky can you be,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
That was so even though the game itself didn't turn out to be, I think, what a lot of us wanted it to be or hoped it would be. That experience for me was so valuable, and now I'm an Edmonton Oilers fan forever, so that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm really glad you like it. I don't know. I think there's, like I say, I think there's so much gold hidden under there, and that game had so much potential.
Yeah.
A real bummer.
It'll be fun to see what kind of games riff on it and try to kind of get that formula right in the future if that ever happens because
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's interesting to hear you say that because I think that the egg that everyone is trying to crack right now and has, I mean, Anthem, we're talking a decade ago now almost, but the egg that Anthem was trying to crack and that every studio, I think, has been trying to crack and is maybe abandoning now a little bit in favor of just going back to like Jedi style single player games is how do you have an always online multiplayer game that also has a really strong narrative and is really story focused that people care about? I don't think anybody has really cracked that egg yet. I don't know if I'm sure it is. I don't have the answer to that. I worked with a lot of studios that have been trying to solve that problem over the last like decade. And I don't know if anybody has really come up with the answer yet. I mean, Apex Legends, I think, does a really good job of getting you to care about their characters,
oh yeah.
which is like a great example of doing that in a way. But yeah, Anthem and lots of other places are still asking that question of like, we want a game as a service because we think it's the thing that's going to make us a bajillion money. But also, players want a good story. How do we do those things at the same time? And it's been a really hard nut to crack.
Yeah, how do you have Fortnite and Mass Effect in one package? Like it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible, but
Yeah.
it's cool seeing games like Avengers or Destiny like try, and experiment with that for sure.
I agree. And I think, yeah, I'm glad you bring up Destiny because I think they are trying, and their seasonal content now, especially, is trying really hard to do exactly that. So it's cool to see them be able to experiment with that.
Yeah, it's sort of like a bit lower stakes, like the seasonal stuff, but the things that they do with it is cool to see how they implement it. It's such a kind of a rapid cadence, it's kind of nobody else is quite doing it like the way that they are in the game itself, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And they have a great narrative team there that they've built up over the last few years, full of like really strong folks, which
Yeah.
is cool. I am glad that generally the industry seems to be moving away from the myth of like, our always online game as a service is the only way to make money in video games, and it's the only kind of game that people want to play. Because it was a really hard time to be a writer in the industry, I'll be honest with you,
Yeah.
because they were asking us to solve this kind of impossible, to your point, problem where you would kind of come on and they would be like, well, this is the thing that all the executives want. So like, now what do we do with it? And it was hard to be able to tell people like, nobody really knows.
Yeah.
Like we can try our best, but nobody knows. And I think it's telling in a way that the best narrative studio like in the world wasn't able to solve it. So I don't know. It's interesting.
That's a good point. Yeah. It was funny how like Fallen Order, I feel like I may be misremembering, but I feel that people really had a question mark on Fallen Order as to whether it would sell the way they wanted it to. And then
100%.
now that Survivor is out, like I think it sold in like what 2 days of April or 3 days of April, it sold more than like any other game in April. So that
Yeah,
myth
listen,
has
I
been
mean,
shattered, thankfully.
totally some inside baseball, and I think this is common knowledge at this point, or like it's been floating out there, but there was an edict that the next Dragon Age be multiplayer because
Hmm.
this was that time when it was like every game has to be a game as a service, has to be multiplayer. JFO came out, sold like gangbusters, and they were like, "Oh, never mind. You can totally make a single player game again. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
We're cut like cancel the multiplayer version. Let's make a single player game again." So like JFO like saved Dragon Age essentially, you know.
Yeah.
But it's true. All it takes is that one. God, I mean, you find this so often in this industry in so many different ways, but it's always like whatever the hit is at that moment, people are like, do that. You know, there's going to be a wave now after Tears of the Kingdom of people being like, put crafting in it.
Yep.
And poor people on video games being like, that's not what our game is about, man. Like, I don't want, we can't do that. Like, but so such is the way of this industry at the
Yeah.
moment.
No, it's so true. It's so true. You get 5 years of imitations of whatever the big hit was, like Destiny 1 or whatever the case may
Yep.
be. So what's next for you? Are you still working on like the KOTOR remake a little bit, or are you writing a book, or can you say?
No, so I actually left the KOTOR remake about a year and a half ago. I took a full-time job at Wizards of the Coast so I had to leave KOTOR for that. But KOTOR has since actually been taken from Aspire, so they're no longer working on it, which is a bummer. But I think it is on perpetual pause at the moment, which is a real bummer. I hope we're still able to make something out of it. It was really fun to work on. But I worked at Wizards of the Coast for about the last year as part of their digital publishing and licensing team. So I worked with the folks making, Baldur's Gate 3 and Idle Champions and incubating a bunch of other Wizards of the Coast video games, which was cool. They massively downsized their video game department. And well, I'm sure you heard that Wizards of the Coast had a ton of downsizing in January. So I actually chose to leave. And now I'm working with the folks at Critical Role,
Oh, very
which
cool.
is really,
Very
really
cool.
fun. Yeah, I mean, they're wonderful. They work across all different mediums in the way that I do, which is great. I am a firm believer in their storytelling. So that's where I am at the moment. I am also working on a couple of comics that I can't talk about yet, but that will be announced soon. And I'm pitching an original novel. It's
Awesome.
going to be my first like original novel. I'm kind of nervous about it. It's interesting. Like I've worked in IP almost my whole career. And
Yeah.
so working on original stuff to me feels really scary. I mean, it feels like the big next step. I have an original graphic novel out already called Tunnel Tales with Kendra Wells, which was wonderful to work on. And it's a project I'm so proud of. But like with IP, you have that safe sandbox. It's what I like about working in IP. You're on the
Yeah.
rails a little bit. I
Yeah.
know when I sit down to write Carol Danvers, what she sounds like, what that world is. Like all of that work is done for you. It's like the writing fan fiction, right? I get to play with my little dolls and it rules. And like I get to play in Star Wars. Like that's great. But writing original stuff is like staring at the blank page, right? And so that's scary for
Hmm.
me. And it feels like the thing that I really need to and want to conquer next. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at, but it's been a blast working with the folks at CR, and I will pop up in games again. I'm sort of, I feel very fortunate to be at a point in my career where I get to find the right fit in video games, because there are so many wonderful opportunities out there right now and so many wonderful games being worked on. And like, I am very much a firm believer in the fact that any project is fun as long as you have the right team and you're working with the right people who are respectful and who appreciate you and who value you. And so, like, when I pick projects in games, I very much don't pick based on the IP or what the project is, but more so like who I would be working with. And like I recommend that this is a dev podcast, like I recommend that so much for any folks because the right people can make any project fun. I mean, I worked with the right people on Anthem and I still love
Yeah.
them to my core. So
Yeah.
I think that's like so much the what matters. And like I think that's why working with the people at CR has been so wonderful because they're all so kind and yeah, I don't know. That's sort of where I'm at. So yeah, a lot of like unannounced stuff at the moment. I think with Battle Scars coming out, I'm taking a bit of a breath to kind of, yeah, work on my own stuff a little bit. And it's been really fun. But hopefully I get to play in the Star Wars sandbox again soon because I love working with those folks. And I mean, it's literally I mean, It's Star Wars, man. Nothing cooler, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful that you kind of got to come full circle with the D&D and Baldur's Gate stuff a little bit in a weird way.
Oh
So,
my God, 100%. That was like such a big moment for me. And, you know, I think I'm hoping too with Survivor out now that there will be even more of a call for like more stories with these characters. So
yeah,
I
absolutely.
hope we get that.
Yeah. I'll take a Grease comic. No, I don't know.
Oh my God, amen. Like
Yeah.
100%. Yes. Give it to me tomorrow. I want to read it. Like, yes.
Awesome. Well, hey, best of luck with your novel and everything else. And thanks so much for doing
Oh,
this.
Alex, thank you. Thank you so much. This is such a blast and have a great day.